no wonder he would go on to celebrate the greatness of the view that he would be discussing, because he had, well, I don't know the order in which he wrote this song. Did he write the song after he wrote his great book on Tenets? You see, he was a great student and author. Whether he was already the author or yet to be the author of a magnificent book on Tenets that Don Lopez translated, and which you should all read. It's an easy read, coming subsequent to Jam-yang-shay-ba's very complex book on Tenets. He wanted to write something easier to read, but very deep and very thorough. And he also, because he was a very important figure in Beijing, in China, and he didn't want something as complex as Jang-kya's magnificent text, but extremely complex text, but very deep. He wanted something deep, but not, shall we say, tiresomely complex by going into a lot of scholastic detail. You know, looking up, for instance, the word in Tibetan and the words that I've translated as tenet. And I sent you that section. I thought, well, we should look up this word tenet. And there's no better place to look it up than in Jang-kya's text. No better. I mean, if you know the difference between Jang-kya's text and Jang-kya's text, you wouldn't turn to Jang-kya's text unless you wanted a short and pithy version. You know, for that you'd look in Jang-kya's text or in some tiny text, even tinier, because you wouldn't want to be burdened with such a huge amount of information. However, since you are all people, I'm inflating you, who can stand the huge amount of information in Jang-kya's text, I sent you that part of Jang-kya's text. It's actually,
Very kind.
it's very interesting. And of course, we're not going to read all, 7 pages that I sent you from Maps of the Profound. It would be well worth your reading through it, but I'll fasten on some highlights today. And it really puts in context so that we won't think that Jang-kya is being nasty by advertising the greatness of the Gelugpa view here in this song, where he's bursting forth and speaking of the value of knowing about the absence of inherent existence and the pitfalls that he finds in others' views. straightforwardly looking at the contrasts, that he actually isn't being nasty. He's showing you what you don't have to assert if you have realized the absence of inherent existence. In other words, we don't have to pretend that everything's equal. You have your view, I have my view, everything's equal, we're all anthropologists, we're all socialists. As we're going to read in Jam-yang-shay-ba, that kind of view indicates that you hate Buddhist doctrine. In other words, the kind of view that we've been educated in contemporary society, in the kind of contemporary society that we've grown up in, which forces us not to come to any conclusions, which means not to appreciate, to hold back and not to appreciate the depths of any system's views. And someone like myself could ask myself, if I appreciate the depths of one system's views, could I appreciate the depths of another system's views? For instance, I have behind me here Keizun Sambo, the Nyingma, an accomplished Nyingma, and Kensung Awan Langden, an accomplished Gelugpa. And my own organization is called the Union of the Old and the New. But frankly, I think the devotion to going deep on even many systems is just what Jang-kya and Jang-kya are talking about. And one shouldn't hold back with a pretension of superficially loving all systems. Oh, I wouldn't want to come to any conclusion. That's maybe untenable. But I like to do a deep dive on anything I come about. And maybe at some point I'll have to on the outside of the house, it says Sanying Sunjuk Ling. And maybe I'll have to scrape off one of them. It was interesting when I asked the carver in the stonemason in Dharamsala to do it. He always carved, new, big, and old, small. So I asked him to do another one. And I told him exactly what I wanted, same size. And he kept carving new, big. So I have one of them downstairs at the base of the Vajradhara, Vajradhara, right? Whatever. The huge applique tanka. One of them downstairs and one at the main. There are two front doors at the main front door. Tacked into the outside wall. Outside. Yeah. Anyway. So, just to, if we look at the beginning of Jam-yang-shay-ba's, his root text is pretty much an advertisement for his own text. Oh, you with intelligence. Happily retain. Get excited about it. This previously non-existent precious eloquence. Wow. He's calling his own book, it was never anything like it before, and it's precious. It's like any of the, 8 precious substances? Anyway, a lamp illuminating the path to omniscience. Wow. Which I, having relied on skillful captains of the ship of reasoning, through hundreds of fatiguing tasks, there's no question about that. Hundreds doesn't just mean, something less than 1,000. But he certainly put more than 1,000 into it. Gained upon crossing to the end of the ocean of tenets. Okay, and then if we scroll down to the 4 asterisks. In the first line there it says, to know such features, it is necessary to have abandoned bias. You see? You can't bring to this study, you see the 4 asterisks?
Yeah.
There are 2 paragraphs with asterisks. It's necessary to have abandoned bias. You can't just hang on to a system because it's ours. My first teacher was a Gelpa. And he was. But when I went to Dharamsala, Kesan Sambhav took me under his wing at just about, but not quite, the same time as the Dalai Lama took me under his wing. And they're both pretty big wings. Huge wings. Both of them certainly, also did divinations on me. Kesan Sambhav told me about his divination. His Holiness didn't tell me about his divination. I did well on the divinations. I would be helpful. But through one's own system, though one's own system is of high quality. Okay, it's not suitable to have attachment and to hate other system. Oh, they're the Sakyavas. Just say Sakyava. That's enough to go, woo! Just, they're Kakuvas. Oh, you don't know what I've heard about Kakuvas. I think that, I heard nice things about Kalu Rinpoche, really nice things about him. And then about the new Kalu Rinpoche, the things he said on the internet about how the monks treated him, raping him, I thought that was fantastic. Fantastic. It showed, you know, his honesty to put that out on the internet. That was fantastic. And I figured, oh, things like that at least is probably how most recognized young lamas are viewed by other monastics, not just monks, but nuns. You know, probably, or maybe not most, but at least some, if not most. But it was, you know, they wanted people to know. And then there's another Kagyuba, I forget his name, really fantastic. You know, how he felt he was like a prisoner. And then, of course, you're brought out to the assembly, and then those very same monks who raped you or just said nasty things and treated you badly are bowing to you. When I was at Gomang, I thought, oh, how terrible it was that, you know, this really, a scholar who was teaching me was running up to a young monk, young, recognized lama, and putting his head at the lama's stomach and taking blessings from him. That was really a nice thing to do. But I thought, oh my, if that was me, I'd really get inflated. And here I would be, young Jeffrey, and I would think, okay, I won't get into that. I would think I'm really great. Whereas I would be a stupid young kid, you know? No matter how much I remember the former life, my former lifetime, whatever, I would just think, well, I must be really great. Because I've got a little bit of memory or something, you know, give me a break. So if you have this kind of, you know, stupid respect and hate for other systems, a few lines down, there are many faults such as being oppressed by great obscuration. This is a warning. Some people think, you know, like some scholars in my own department, if religious studies, there's no difference between good and bad explanations. And then a little bit down, mere non-bias is not sufficient. Jang-kya says you must analyze with intelligence that discriminates between good and bad explanations. In my department, I had a bit of a feud between a Christian scholar, you know, between a Christian scholar and myself. And one of the other scholars said to me, you know, you and he are quite alike. You both think there is such a thing as wisdom. And I thought, that's true. Both he and I do think that. We had a bit of a feud. Very funny. I thought the other guy was very perspicacious. He really saw how alike we were. Whereas he was, you know, one of these like anthropology type guys. Everything's equal. Which is a nice, you know, it's something I was educated in that loosened me up and, you know, made it possible to look at other systems with an open mind and then become a bigot. Mere non-bias is not sufficient, blah, blah, blah. So then he says, since otherwise you would be susceptible to being led by a fool to a promontory over a river. How many people feel like that? You know, being led by a Tibetan Lama to a cliff over a river. That you finally get to the point where you realized that Lama is going to push you off the cliff into a river and you're going to drown, and thank goodness you woke up and removed the blindfold over your eyes and had to give up the Lama. You know, it's happened to a lot of people. For it is necessary to eliminate doubts through the power of valid cognition. Wow, that's difficult, isn't it? I mean, so, and it's, I mean, what he's saying here is really difficult. So the next 4 asterisk. Wow, English is probably like any other language, difficult to pronounce. Consequently, do not create boastful attitudes of bewilderment by thinking, there are many arguments among the 6 ornaments of India. All right, we've got pictures of them in the next room. You know, Dharmakirti's pictured like this, looking really nasty and ready to debate. And then, of course, it said that the views he was holding are all wrong. Not all wrong. Many of them are wrong. Many of them are holding to extremes. Many. I wonder what percentage. Probably not that many when it comes to the percentage. And if I was to discriminate between our own and others' positions, this would be a case of desire and hatred. Oh, is it a case of desire and hatred if you discriminate? Is discrimination necessarily a case of desire and hatred? It isn't. Whereas, since for me, there's no difference between the Great Exposition School and the Consequent School. They're all equal. I'm sweet. I'm a nice guy. I have no desire and hatred because I have no discrimination. But I do like the Democrats and I hate the Republicans. Well, there's no greater deed than that, than to make discrimination among philosophy. Although is it Republicans or is it Democrats who are all wrong? Although nowadays people are saying Joe Manchin is all wrong and some other one is all right. And it clearly shows that you are a fool if that's what you're thinking. Well, Jang-kya was really laying it on. And that you dislike the doctrine. Wow, if you like the doctrine, you got to get in there and analyze and think a lot about it and Okay, then he goes on, and it's really lovely. I did my final prep for our meeting today, reading through this, which obviously I hope it's obvious. I spend a lot of time on to translate this material, to translate this material for the book. So, for instance, for this book, Tenet. Tenet means you're holding something in English, but it's a lousy translation. Lousy. You're not just holding something. The main word is siddhanta, the fourth word, the main word. If we looked in a short book on so-called tenets, siddha, the fourth word here, siddha, the Sanskrit, and you have to turn to the Sanskrit here. Siddha means, in Tibetan it's troop or truba. It's established, something that's established for your mind. And anta means end, or so it's an established conclusion. It's an established conclusion. And for it to be flexible enough to cover all systems, it's an established conclusion for your awareness. You know, you've thought on it, you've worked it over. So tenet, you know, a better translation would be established conclusion. You see, which conveys a lot more of the meaning. But the reason why Hopkins settled on the word tenet is because tenet is shorter. It's not two words. But that's a jackass reason for not laying on the reader, you know, established conclusions and making the reader think. Why are these called established conclusions? And then when you read about how it's called established conclusion, you then put that in mind and you're prompted to think that when you have to read over and over again a book about established conclusions. And for instance, in Jang-kya's title or Jam-yang-shay-ba's title, Presentation of Established Conclusions. The four systems of established conclusions. And established conclusions for those scholars' particular awarenesses for their minds, established for their minds. And not just something they're holding. Because I shouldn't say mama in this situation, because my mother told me, or my father told me, or my uncle told me, this is what you've got to hold, and preferably buy a gun and shoot people who don't hold them, right? Because how are they established? They're established by reasoning and scripture. Reasoning and scripture. Well, usually that's the case with Jewish, Christian, Muslim. I don't know much of anything about Muslim, but around enough Jews. There was a great Jewish fellow just a couple years ago at a Yale symposium I was at, and we had a great deal of fun together because, he's a rabbi, and rabbis are always talking and debating and so forth. And he was from Rhode Island, I'm from Rhode Island, and so we burst out. He would jokingly say, the professor from Rhode Island, and I would say whatever his place was. We had a lovely time. Because we, two debaters. So, Muslim debaters, obviously. Yes, and there was a Muslim who was tutoring one of the great figures in Saudi Arabia. Yeah. And he was enjoying me. I could tell. And he said it. Anyway. On and on and on. So Jam-yang-shay-ba, being who he is, wants you to know that there are many words. Samaya, Siddhanta, Siddha, Siddhanta, Tantra, that kind of surprises you, and Kartanta, all mean tenet, established conclusion. They're all synonyms. And then he explains, but he's looked into, I had the English word earlier. Like dictionaries, Sanskrit dictionaries. He had Sanskrit. He looked into books. There's another word for dictionary. And like Amara, like he goes through each of these words, and he consulted Amara Sinha's treasury. In Tibetan, Chime-zer. Chime Senge's Zer. Sir? Anyway, if you read these, you'll see, if you look up a word in a dictionary, you find here, and we'll just do one or two of these, the word samaya means various things. It doesn't just mean tenet or established conclusion. It means practicing oaths. That's how you read these. It means practicing oaths. It means time. It means tenet or established conclusion. It means correct knowledge. Now you may think, this is more than I want to know. But he's informing us that if you look this up in a dictionary in Sanskrit, a Sanskrit dictionary, you're going to get all of these. Non-virtuous previous action. This is one of the meanings of samaya. It also means suffering, and so forth. Now it so happens that one of the meanings of samaya, we know it as meaning pledge. It's interesting that wasn't one of the in the list. It's like, what? This is the famous dictionary. Lexicon. Lexicon is the word I was searching for. I don't know. Dictionary. Why have a fancier word but lexicon? So, Siddhanta. through compounding siddhi and anta, you get siddhyanta, siddhi and anta. Siddhi is used for actual achievement, meaning actual yogic achievement, established and so forth. Siddhanta is compounding siddha and anta, siddhanta, which is the one we were talking about earlier. And with respect to siddha, okay, established, terminated, ceased, finished. Nishpana, on and on and on. And Tantra, which you might be interested in, Amarasiddha's treasury, his lexicon says, Tantra is used for principal, main, that kind of principal. It's used for tenet. Tantra is used for tenet. These are all surprising. These two. Weaving threads. Weavings. Thoroughly concealed. And the one word, many meanings, which you see there's no note from me. I didn't find out what that text is. It's used for treatise, just treatise in general. Lineage. Lineage, you can see, is like weaving threads, weaving lineage. Continuum, that's the one we're used to. The actions of activated medicines. Bliss, powerful, training the winds. Look at all those meanings. And tenet, tantra, kirtantra. I said I wouldn't go through all of these. Means Yama, Lord of Death. Tantra means Lord of Death. My gosh. Oh, Kirtantra, sorry. One who making the end. Kirta basically means make, and anta means end. So of course Yama, having made the end having made, end having ended. It's Yama, why not? That's most appropriate. Tenet, again. Conclusion, end having made, end having been made, and might meaning power. I don't get that out of the etymology. Well, I guess might, because if you have power, such marvelous might, your end could be made. Non-virtuous action. And then at the end here, now I'm built in. The Coca Mongolian makes a nice, shall I make a pun, conclusion out of this. Anta, which means end, is taken as finished. A tenet. You see, finished, you've come to a conclusion. A meaning established in the perspective of one's awareness. That's finished. It's finished. It's finished as anything else. Finished means non-existent as anything else. You know, a tenet means you're going to hold it. So it's not going to be anything else. Jesus is it. It's not going to be anything else as far as you're concerned. Avalokiteshvara, you know, or there is rebirth. I've told you that when I was about to die in my last lifetime, I was not convinced. I was not convinced that there was rebirth. I was going to see if there was rebirth. And now I have seen. So it's an established conclusion, right? Non-existent as anything else. I'll take off my shirt at that. Anta, end, is taken as position. And if you have a position, that's the end. It's not just something you're I'm going to take a position. That means I'm going to pretend this is final. You see, anta, end, final. Faction, direction. You know, this, it is described as meaning discriminated as a position, discriminated as a faction. Mine is this and not anything else. He gives then an example from the Hira schools. The severance of the continuum of matter and knowledge, or rikpa, consciousness, at the time of the remainderless nirvana, is an established conclusion, tenet, of the Hira schools. Established conclusion. I'm making myself feel sad that I chose tenet instead of the more literal. I'm quite enamored of my old age decision to stick with the more literal, because it has so many reverberations that is established. Since it is anta is taken as a factor, a cha, got another word, factor. Since it is a portion, I mean that's the word chashe, Tibetan, portion that is established for their awareness, for their awareness. It's not, doesn't have to be established in general. Because there's this system, that system. I mean, for those persons. And so, somebody mentioned in our last meeting tenets. And you see, when you mention something, it's a trigger. It's a stimulus. Stimulus for me. So, it's not when Jang-kya Röl-pay-dor-je after he, after these uplifting elements of his poem that were where he was so uplifting and uplifting for us, if we were deeply into tenets, if we were deeply into established conclusions for the, as Lopez calls them, the Indian Buddhist schools of tenets, we would appreciate his extending what he had been teaching us in song to our knowledge about tenets, where he's teasing these schools lower than the consequentialists, lower than these profound meanings of the interrelationship of emptiness and dependent arising. Those who couldn't put this together and therefore were clutching on to unnecessary conclusions established for their mind because they couldn't fit in the harmony of dependent arising and the emptiness of inherent existence. We would sparkle on his I would say teasings here that, and see that certainly he's not degrading into partisan bickering at the end of his marvelous poem. That he's doing the best of the best to bring home the implications of what he's just been teaching us.